Hello, everyone, and I'm so excited to welcome you to our 12th Democracy Talk. With us today, we have Valeria Damiani. She's based at LUMSA University in Rome. And as you saw on the speaker card, Valeria will speak about the school as a democratic learning environment, promoting a whole school approach to civic and citizenship education in Italian primary and lower secondary schools. Valeria, just briefly, and she can go on and introduce herself in more detail. She is the principal investigator of the PRIN 2022 project, which discusses schools as a democratic learning environment, promoting civic and citizenship education through the whole school approach, essentially what she will be talking about here today. And I'm very happy to welcome Valeria, who will join us in discussion with my co-host here, Diana Trevino. Welcome, Valeria.
Thank you, Vanina, and thank you all for this invitation. I'm very happy to be here. I teach research methods in education at LUMSA University in Rome, and as you said, I'm leading this group of researchers for this project financed by the Ministry of Education in Italy. The PRIN projects are those projects that the ministry considers projects of relevant interest at the national level. So I will share my screen now. Presentation. Okay. So the goal of the project is to measure and work with schools on democratic learning environments for fostering civic and citizenship education. Before talking about the project itself, it is important to provide you with a picture of what civic and citizenship education is in Italy. We often call it in our country a Cinderella subject, civic and citizenship education, because it is a subject that usually has not a strong importance within the curriculum. Another aspect that did not help in providing civic and citizenship education with a strong relevance is that there have been several different educational reforms that have been undertaken throughout the years. And these reforms, unfortunately, led to uncertain results in terms of efficacy, in terms of teaching and assessment practices. So the scenario of civic and citizenship education in Italy is characterized by a wide range of guidelines that in the last 15 years have been released by the ministry. And these, of course, have caused a lot of work and let's say also have disturbed the work of the schools. And most of these guidelines, of course, are focused on several declaration of principles in relation to content, areas, skills to be developed, competencies to be developed within the civic and citizenship education curriculum that unfortunately have been unfulfilled in school practice. So we observe a gap between the national regulations and this continuous release of national regulation on civic and citizenship education and what schools do in relation to this educational area. For example, we have this project started within a legal framework, which was Law 92, released in 2019, that reintroduced civic education as a separate subject within the Italian curriculum, school curriculum. But now, in September, we have other new guidelines just released at the beginning of September 2024 that change the normative scenario and then forced us to rethink or reconsider the project within these new guidelines. So it took only less than 5 years for the law 92 to be established, and schools were just beginning to be acquainted with this new law. And then now for this new school year, they have to start all over again, planning, organizing, and delivering civic and citizenship education. So what is the actual scenario at the moment in Italy? Civic and citizenship education is a separate subject, but it is delivered cross-curricularly. So it has its own mark in the report card, but basically all the teachers of a single class can be involved in delivering civic and citizenship education. So there is no dedicated teacher to it. The teachers that can be involved in the subject are usually the ones of Italian language, history, and geography. But again, it's up to the single class to decide what kind of teachers, what kind of subjects to involve. The thematic areas that were included in Law 92 were Italian Constitution, sustainability, so the Agenda 2030, and digital citizenship. And this new law included additional areas pertaining to national aspects of citizenship. So within this complex scenario, this project aims to is focused on the whole school approach for civic and citizenship education. So our reference framework are the studies conducted by the Council of Europe on the whole school approach, and in general, reference framework of competence for democratic culture, the IEA-ICCS study, so the international comparative study on civic and citizenship education developed by the IEA, and of course, all the reference related to citizenship competence, so the lifelong learning competences from the European Union. What is the idea, the rationale underlying the project? So the school is intended as a democratic learning environment that can itself be a scenario, a place where students can experience and practice citizenship competence at different levels. And these levels, according to the literature, are basically three. So the teaching and learning, the classroom level, the school management, so the possibility for students to be engaged in school activities, in school decisions, in establishing the school rules, and the cooperation between the school and the local community. So these are the three main strengths that have been considered in this project. So our goal, our general objective is to promote democratic learning environments through the whole school approach. We, of course, are interested in delivering with schools civic and citizenship education activities that are strongly related to the three dimensions of the whole school approach. And at the same time, we are interested in considering the whole school approach as a tool for promoting civic and citizenship education itself as in schools. This is, of course, very challenging within the national scenario I have just described, because the focus is on participation of an active engagement of students. And that is an aspect that unfortunately is, let's say, not explicitly stated within our national guidelines, but it is itself a very important dimension of citizenship competence and citizenship education as a whole. So the project is divided into two phases. In the first phase, we carried out an analysis, an in-depth qualitative analysis of the whole school approach in 6 Italian schools, 2 in Rome, 2 in Bologna, and 2 in Verona. University of Rome, LUMSA, and University of Bologna, and University of Verona are the 3 universities that form the consortium for this project. So the schools are istituti comprensivi in Italian. That means that are schools that comprehend both primary students and lower secondary students. So in the first phase of the project, we conducted 6 multi-perspective case studies that included interviews with the principal and the school head, the person who is in charge of civic and citizenship education at the school level, who's called the referente. It is the person who has the responsibility for coordinating all the civic and citizenship education activities at the school level and to organize the delivering of the cross-curricular subject. And focus group carried out with the teachers at primary and lower secondary, in primary and lower secondary school. In addition to this, we have also administered 1 questionnaire for primary school teachers and students, and 1 questionnaire for lower secondary teachers and students in order to gauge relevant aspects of the whole school approach across the school. So it was important for us to gather data at the general level on the perspective from students and teachers in relation to the 3 dimensions of the whole school approach. These multi-perspective case studies will form the basis of the phase 2 of the project, that is the school improvement plans. In this year, we have just started phase 2. We will carry out in-service teachers' professional development activities in the 6 schools that took part in phase 1 on promoting civic and citizenship education using a whole school approach. So on the basis of the results from the multi-perspective case studies, we will carry out these in-service teachers' professional development activities. What are the main results of the project? We are drafting at the moment 6 research reports on the whole school approach. Each report will be focused on 1 school participating in the project. At the end of the project, we will draft the toolkit for schools that is intended as a self-assessment tool on the whole school approach. So the idea is to promote the sustainability of the project through the realization of this toolkit for schools that are interested in measuring their degree, let's say, of their kind of use of the whole school approach within their institution. And then finally, the development of guidelines on school organization and school design to enhance the whole school approach in the first cycle of education. So a sort of document that can help policymakers in including this relevant part of civic and citizenship education within our national guidelines, or more in general, when talking about civic and citizenship education in our country. So this is the structure of the project in general. So we started from a desk review on the whole school approach, and we collected existing tools for measuring it at the school level. These tools are related to, of course, for example, ICCS, teacher and student questionnaires questions, and scales on school and classroom climate, for example. So we developed our theoretical framework, and then we carried out the multi-perspective case studies in 6 first cycles schools, so primary schools and lower secondary schools. These schools were selected on a base considering their degree of involvement in civic and citizenship education activities. In particular, we have considered the number of projects that these schools carried out with external organization in the field of civic and citizenship education. So we considered the degree of openness to the school to the local community, which is one of the 3 dimensions of the whole school approach, but it was the aspect that could be measured, considered more easily as a rationale for the selection of the schools. So we have drafted the research tools and conducted the case studies, and we are now carrying out qualitative and quantitative analysis, so analyzing the interviews, the focus groups, and the questionnaire data. At the same time, once we have finalized the case studies, we will draft the research reports and start thinking of the toolkit for schools. And then we will present the results of these reports in an online seminar involving all the teachers of the 6 schools participating in the project. One of the outputs of the project is also the possibility for schools to stay in touch. So networking activities between schools that can help them in sharing best practice, but also challenges and points of view on civic and citizenship education. And then the second phase, the creation of the in-service teacher trainings. We will create working groups at school levels. So civic and citizenship education, as I said, is a cross-curricular subject. So it is crucial that teachers work in team. And then we will work closely with schools in fine-tuning the training activities in order to meet their needs and to be in line with the characteristic of the school and their curriculum and the organization and so on and so forth. Finally, at the end, we will draft the guideline. So, as I said, we have developed the questionnaires for teachers, all teachers in primary and lower secondary schools. These questionnaires were addressed to all teachers. And then students' questionnaires administered only to students at 4th and 5th grade and to students at 6th and 8th grade. This is because 4th and 5th grade are the last 2 grades in primary school, and 6th grade is the first grade in lower secondary school. So we also wanted to know what happened between, in the transition between primary school and lower secondary school. As I said, these 2 kind of schools are under the same organization, Istituto Comprensivo in Italy. So there is one school principal, for example, for primary school and lower secondary school. So it was important to understand what happens in the transition. On the other hand, we decided to administer the questionnaire on the whole school approach and the democratic learning environments to all teachers, because all teachers, independently from the fact that they teach civic and citizenship education, can contribute to the development of democratic learning environments. The questionnaire included a separate section only for those teachers who are involved directly in the teaching of civic and citizenship education. And this section is related to teaching methodologies, assessment strategies, and so on. But the main structure of the questionnaire was taught for all teachers. And then we carried out semi-structured interviews with the school head and the referente, the person in charge of civic and citizenship education, and the focus group protocols with teachers. We administered the questionnaires last spring, and also we conducted at the same time the interviews and the focus groups with teachers, primary and lower secondary. So what are the main topics? What were the main topics of the interviews? The interviews and the focus groups were organized across the same subject areas, let's say the same topics, in order to have a sort of triangulation between the point of views of the school heads, the referente, so the person in charge of civic and citizenship education, and the teachers. Of course, when interviewing the school heads, the focus was on the school as a whole, on the composition of the school, on the organization of the curriculum, on the implementation of civic and citizenship education at the general level, and on the reflections and practices in relation to democratic learning environments, which is something that Italian, or at least the school heads we interviewed were not very familiar with. And of course, we also asked them for interests and needs for the in-service teacher training. The interview with the person in charge for civic and citizenship education at the school level, of course, was mainly focused on the organization of the cross-curricular implementation of civic and citizenship education, whether there were teaching approaches and assessment strategies established at the school level, his or her role as a person in charge. That is not easy, since he or she has to cooperate and let the colleagues at the school level work together. And this is something Italian teachers are not, again, very familiar with, especially in secondary education. And again, we also asked this referente for learning needs for the in-service teacher training. And finally, the focus groups we carried out with teachers were mainly related to classroom practices for civic and citizenship education. So the activities carried out at the classroom level, but also their perception of classroom climate and student participation at the classroom level, and the relationships at the classroom level, and the student participation at the school level. We also asked questions in relation to formative assessment practices and strategies adopted by the teachers, because we thought, in line with what the Council of Europe research on this, that democratic learning environments also pertain the dimension of teaching. So democratic teaching is a teaching that, for example, considers the importance of sharing the learning objectives at the beginning of a lesson, provides relevant feedbacks to students, share the evaluation and the assessment criteria with students. So the dimension of democratic teaching was operationalized within the construct of formative assessment. The questionnaire, finally, we have organized them in 4 sections for students and teachers. The first section is related to background information on age and gender, but also, for example, for students, their discussion and interest in civic issues, their sense of civic self-efficacy, for example, the participation in voluntary activities outside the school. Then there is a section related to classroom level, so democratic learning environment at the classroom level. So in this section, we ask for students' involvement in classroom activities, the formative assessment, the classroom climate and classroom relation, both from the students and the teacher point of view. Of course, the questions were differentiated on the basis of the age of the school and primary and lower secondary level. And then there is the school level section, which we asked about students' involvement in school activities, school climate and relation, and the last one on civic and citizenship education, which kind of activities, the topics, the methodologies adopted, and the assessment strategies for teachers, and the activities actually carried out for students, and the opportunities to learn they have. This is the number of respondents we got, about more than 200 teachers in primary and lower secondary schools, and more than 1,000 students in primary and lower secondary schools for the 6 schools involved in the project. And finally, our next steps. We will carry out next week a webinar with the schools for presenting the results. And then we are again planning the in-service activity, the training program with for the teachers. And these training activities will start in November, along with some online workshop. And at the same time, we will continue carrying out the qualitative and quantitative analysis, mainly secondary analysis. And in October 2025, we will release the toolkits and the guidelines. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Valeria. This was incredibly interesting, and I'm sure it was very useful to all of our participants here on Zoom, and hopefully to anyone that was watching on YouTube. I'm going to go ahead and ask the first question as we usually do, and then I'll open up the floor to anyone else who would like to ask Valeria any questions. So you have some time to write anything down if you're interested in asking. I was more so curious to hear if you can discuss about any measurable impacts on student engagement and performance in regards to the whole school approach, and if you're able to discuss how those are generally measured.
We asked about students' involvement in classroom activities, for example, the choice of textbook materials, the possibility to participate in establishing the classroom rules, the possibility of discussing with the teacher about the assessment criteria, for example, at the classroom level. And at the school level, we measured the extent to which students are involved in decision-making processes. For example, whether they have their say in deciding about regular daily activities at schools, for example, how the break is run, or how the library is, the opening hours of the library, and whether students have the possibility to have their say in deciding which activities can be conducted outside the schools or school trips, and whether they feel their voice is heard for the most important matters at school. Preliminary results show that basically there is kind of a gap between what teachers think about their students' involvement and what their students perceive their actual involvement. So teachers, for example, are more willing to say that the rules have been, the school rules, mostly the classroom rules, are the result of a shared discussion with students, while on the other hand, half of the students reported that they haven't been involved in establishing the classroom role. So the perception of participation at classroom level differs from teachers and students. The participation at the school level is instead more difficult to measure because basically in primary and lower secondary school in Italy, there is no participation established in the guidelines, in the national guidelines. So it is something up to schools to implement. So we have schools that are interested in this topic that have autonomously decided to carry out activities in order to promote student engagement at the school level. But actually they are not asked to do so by the national guidelines. So it is something extra, let's say, more difficult to measure.
Yeah, I was about to say, I'm sure it makes it more difficult to measure then. Thank you so much for answering that. It's definitely enlightening, and I think it's something that should help everyone, especially those in the Living Lab projects in the different countries. I wanted to open up the floor to anyone else that had any questions for Valeria. You can raise your Georgios. You can go ahead.
Thank you very much, Valeria. Thank you, Nina. Also, Valeria, we met in Cyprus where there was this, right?
Nice to see you
ESSER
again.
conference. Good to see you again. And if you want to tell us more about this network that you convene, but I wanted to ask a question. In this case, we have our project, the Democrat project, which somehow it is complementary to what you're doing. You're focusing more, it seems, on creating a democratic environment for learning for children. And through that, you expect them also to learn democracy in practice. What we do also, or we focus more on competencies, what the outcome of whatever methods are used can be reflected in the children that leave school in terms of democratic competencies, and whether they can really know how to participate inclusively, including others also. They can judge, especially in the era of fake news, and they are resilient in terms of beliefs, even in difficult circumstances. So I think you are approaching from different ends, but we meet somewhere. And do you see any synergies? Of course, yeah, I could explain more the project. I don't know how familiar you are with it. Thank you.
Yes, of course. Our focus is also related to citizenship competence. So in order to implement or to design activities that deal with citizenship competence, we firstly need a scenario. So the experiences that can help students in deploying those knowledge, attitudes, and skills that are related to citizenship competence. And our scenario is the school itself. So how to exploit the school experience in a democratic way in order to promote civic citizenship competence. So first of all, through participation and engagement inside the school, but also outside the school, but again, also in experiencing a teaching and learning that is democratic. So adopting those strategies that can help students in practicing and living democracy also through their learning. One of the aspects that was, let's say, not central, but it is included again in the questionnaire is self-assessment, which is an aspect that is also present in the Council of Europe research. So when we talk about democratic learning environments, we also talk about the responsibility that students take in order to accomplish a task and to take care of the school environment, but also of their learning, because the learning is their first responsibility. So when we want to talk about, developing young citizens, future citizens, the first thing is to make them responsible. And the first thing is, since we are in schools, to make them responsible in relation to their learning. So formative assessment and self-assessment are two precious tools that can be used in this view, and unfortunately are not that used in school and classroom practices, and especially in secondary schools. So the switch is to consider all the different school aspects that are implicitly addressed within the school experiences, across a perspective of civic and citizenship education development. The interviews and the focus groups highlighted that teachers and school heads have dealt with these aspects, with these topics, on a different wide range of occasions, but never within, an organized program or structure focused on citizenship education. So there is something that happens in schools, but implicitly and in an unstructured way.
Thanks, Valeria. And thank you, Georgios, for your question. Next up, I see that Karsten, you have a hand raised. You can go ahead.
Yeah, I have a more basic questions. If you mentioned that you're working with 6 schools, the questions comes up how you selected the schools, or if they are participating voluntarily, and what type of schools, if they have experience with democratic procedures or democratic environments and civic educations or not. Thank you.
Yes, as I said, we considered one aspect of the whole school approach in order to select the school, that was the links with the community. So the schools that we selected are schools that have carried out several projects within the community. For example, the schools in northern Italy, in Bologna and Verona, have carried out activities related to the student council with the municipality, or the schools in Rome have been part of project carried out at the city level, in Rome, related to school that are open to the local community. So schools that were open also in the afternoon for carrying out activities with the local community. So we selected schools that were, let's say, already engaged on one aspect of the whole school approach, which actually was the easiest aspect to consider for the selection, as the school participation, the school management. As I said, it is very difficult to measure, and it is something new for our school, so we couldn't consider that dimension for the selection. And the teaching and learning approaches, of course, can be measured only once the school agreed to be part of the study. So for a general, selection, we considered only one dimension of the whole school approach, that was the engagement of the school within the local community.
Thank you for that, Karsten, and thanks for your answer, Valeria. I see next we have Diana with her hand raised.
Yes, hello, Valeria, and thank you very much for this very interesting project you presented. And as I understood, it's still ongoing, but I was wondering, do you integrate any feedback from teachers or students, for example, regarding the assessment, if they feel these are the right questions to ask? And do you use any feedback to redefine your tools you develop for assessing the competencies?
We carried out a small tryout with some teachers and students in order to fine-tune the questions. We have especially difficulties in adapting the questions to primary school students, because most of the tools that we found were related to students in secondary schools, or were related to context, for example, American contexts that are very different from our organization, of our school system. So many of the topics that were addressed were not applicable in our country. So we had the need to carry out this little trial, which was a thinking aloud, basically, with 10 or 15 teachers and 10 or 15 students at primary, lower secondary level, in order to understand the comprehension of the questions and whether the question went in line with what happened in the school and can be understandable. So yes, we did it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Diana. Ben, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Thanks, Vanina. Thanks so much, Valeria. It was really, really interesting. And the question I had, I wondered whether you'd come across any sort of competing commitments in terms of whole school approaches. So are there other whole school focuses that schools are having in the context that you were researching in?
Not quite sure I understood your question correctly, but the whole school approach is something, let's say, new for teachers and school heads. So it is something, basically, they have never heard about it. So we firstly try to explain it to them through the idea of democratic learning environments and citizenship competence. Of course, this is something very challenging for schools. As I said, in Italy, we have this plethora of national reforms, and teachers and schools are asked to implement different kinds of civic and citizenship education every 5 or 7 years. So it is a Cinderella subject. It is something that schools are, let's say, afraid of delivering, because it is something confused at the national level. It is something complicated, because I believe that citizenship education is indeed a cross-curricular subject. And this itself makes it very difficult to implement in a school that is structured on, it is based on disciplines. So at primary level, less, but basically the school organization is organized through disciplines. So when you have to implement a cross-curricular subject, schools are in trouble. So I don't know if this could be a competing interest, but this is the feeling we got when we talked about this topic. And yes, I don't know if this answers your question.
Yeah, it did. I suppose in the Irish context, I'm involved in a project and we're looking at whole school approaches, and we're finding that some schools are already doing whole school approaches in terms of intercultural education. Some are doing whole school approaches in terms of sustainability. So we're finding that it's not that there are sort of challenges in terms of the amount of different whole school approaches some schools are doing. But
for us, it was, a new area, completely new area. The link that could be recognized by school was the competence development, because our national guidelines for Italian language, math, and everything is strongly connected to the idea of the lifelong learning competences of the European Union. So basically, all the teachers know what a competence is. The problem is that to deliver a competence-oriented approach in a school, we need to work, cross-curricularly, and we need to work with tasks and situations. So the difficulties are the same related to civic citizenship competence. So that was the aspect that was most familiar to them. But basically, this is something new for them.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ben, and thanks, Valeria. Do we have any more questions from anyone here? It doesn't seem like there's any questions on YouTube at the moment. Oh, Diana, go ahead.
Yes, I have maybe my last question for you, Valeria, and I addressed this already to other experts that presented projects. How do you plan to promote, so to say, your results when you finish your project, and how do you plan to communicate maybe also your results to policymakers in education in Italy?
Well, of course, through the traditional channels of dissemination, so seminars and the conferences at the national and international level. What we would like to see is the growing of a network. So we are working on this aspect between the 6 schools. It's a small qualitative study, but it goes in depth to analyze the school organization and climate of these democratic environments of these schools. So what we would like to know is to put the schools in contact and check whether the activities that we will carry out through the teacher training will not end with the end of the project, but will continue to be implemented in schools. So a sort of follow-up between the schools themselves, but also with us as researchers, in order to carry out this research in the future, also when the project will be over, because this kind of topic and issues are so complicated, let's say, so complex, that is quite, let's say, naive to think that in 6 months, 7 months of teacher training, we will manage to reach some relevant results. So we will start building the community, we will start, planting the seeds. So our hope is to continue working with the schools also after the end of the project, in order to, reach more stronger results in terms of efficacy, in terms of impacts at the school level, because now we can work at the individual level. So the single teachers who are willing to be part of the teacher training program, it is something free, open, so no one is forcing anyone. And neither the school head can force teachers to take part into the teacher training program. So this year will be a year when we will work with single individual teachers or classroom council, let's say. But we would like to have stronger impact on the school, but this requires time.
Thank you.
And go ahead.
Yeah, there was another question that came to mind, Valeria. It was around the teachers, and did you come across anything in relation to, schools as democratic workplaces for teachers? To what extent do they have a say in how schools run, or maybe connected to sort of leadership?
Again, this is something that happens in upper secondary schools, but not in lower secondary school, and in a very few cases in primary school. So our challenge was to involve teachers in thinking of their young pupils as citizens, although they are, even if they are in primary school. So civic and citizenship education in primary school in Italy is mainly related to the relations, to knowing the others, and having a responsibility of your own environment, which is something okay for the first year, the first grades of primary school. But then that's why we focus on 4th and 5th grade. there is a possibility, there is a room for working on other aspects related to participation and engagement for primary school students. And the same applies to lower secondary students. For example, we don't have classroom representatives in lower secondary Italian schools. We only have them in upper secondary schools. So there is this gap, let's say. If you look at the EDC last report, which is kind old, 2017, you see that there are several school education systems in which also at primary and lower secondary schools there are possibilities and councils for students to participate. In Italy, we don't have this in our school system. So this project will also try to shed a light on these possibilities that can be implemented also for younger students.
Thank you, Valeria. Thank you to everyone who asked all of these questions and was so engaged with Valeria's very informative presentation. I'm glad it could offer some insight into what they're doing in Italy with the whole school approach and with this project. I want to just thank you once again for joining this week. Thank you to Valeria, thank you to Diana, and to everyone. And I wanted to announce our next democracy talk will be on November 13th, and we'll have Maria Rosa Bujarais of the University of Barcelona as our guest speaker. And she'll speak about how to educate in a pluralistic and democratic society, focusing on higher education. So, Valeria, if you would like to join, you can, if you're free on November 13th at 3 p.m. CET. And for anyone else watching, you can stay tuned for that. Thanks again for joining, and we look forward to seeing everyone soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.